The bullet that grazed Nora Aldridge's shoulder in Tucson was supposed to have killed her, but fate had other plans that scorching afternoon in August 1883. She had been living under a different name then, working in a saloon where the wrong man had taken an interest. And when she refused his advances one too many times, he decided to make an example of her. The scar was still pink and raw when she stepped off the dusty stage in Globe, Arizona, 3 weeks later, carrying everything she owned in a worn carpetbag, and praying that this copper mining town would be far enough from her past. Globe sat nestled in the mountains, surrounded by rugged terrain that promised both isolation and opportunity. The town had grown up around the silver and copper deposits, drawing men who sought their fortunes in the earth and women who sought to build something resembling civilization in the wilderness. Nora had $23 to her name, a fake reference letter she had written herself, and enough desperation to make her believable when she walked into the general store and asked about work. The proprietor, a round-faced woman named Mrs. Henderson, looked her up and down with shrewd eyes that missed nothing, including the way Nora favored her left side. "You running from something or someone?" Nora met her gaze steadily. "Does it matter if I am willing to work hard and keep my nose clean, Mrs. Henderson considered this, then nodded slowly. "I suppose it does not. Can you keep accounts? My eyesight is not what it used to be, and my husband has never had a head for numbers." "Yes, madam, I can read, write, and cipher better than most." "Then you can start tomorrow. There is a room above the store that you can use. It is not much, but it is clean and the roof does not leak. $20 a month plus room and board." Nora felt something in her chest loosen for the first time in weeks. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. You will not regret this." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "See that I do not, girl. And whatever you are running from, you leave it at the door. In Globe, people mind their own business for the most part, but that only works if you give them no reason to start asking questions." Nora settled into Globe with the quiet determination of someone who had learned that the only person she could rely on was herself. The work at the general store was steady, and Mrs. Henderson proved to be fair if exacting. The town itself was rough around the edges, full of miners and cowboys, gamblers and prospectors, but there was also a church, a school, and enough families to give the place a veneer of respectability. She had been there for 2 months when she first saw Ethan Vance. He came into the store on a Tuesday morning in October, when the heat had finally broken, and the air carried a hint of coolness that promised winter was somewhere on the horizon. Nora was restocking shelves when the door opened, and she glanced up to see a tall man with dark hair and eyes the color of steel step inside. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was and felt no need to prove it to anyone. His clothes were worn but well maintained, his boots dusty from riding, and he wore his gun belt with the casual comfort of a man who knew how to use it. "Help you find something?" Nora asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Ethan removed his hat, revealing hair that was slightly too long and curled at his collar. "Need supplies for a few weeks. Flour, coffee, beans, salt pork. Whatever you have that will keep." She nodded and began gathering items, aware that he was watching her with an intensity that made her self-conscious. "You work one of the ranches around here. Got a small spread about 10 miles north. Run cattle, do some horse trading. Nothing fancy, but it keeps me busy." Nora set the supplies on the counter and began tallying the cost. "That will be $4.30. He counted out the money, his hands rough and calloused from hard work. As she was wrapping the packages, he said, "I have not seen you around before." "I have been here about 2 months, working for Mrs. Henderson. You got a name?" She hesitated for just a moment before answering. Nora Aldridge. Something in his expression shifted, became thoughtful. Well, Miss Aldridge, welcome to Globe. If you need anything, my place is the Vance Ranch, about 10 miles up the North Road. Anyone can point you in the right direction. Thank you, but I cannot imagine why I would need to find your ranch, Mr. Vance. His lips curved into a smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. You never know when you might need a friend in this country, Miss Aldridge. Best to know where they are before you need them. After he left, Mrs. Henderson came out from the back room where she had been sorting inventory. That was Ethan Vance. Good man. Keeps to himself mostly, but he is honest and he does not cause trouble. His father had the ranch before him, built it up from nothing. Ethan took it over when his parents died of influenza about 5 years back. Nora stored this information away without commenting, but she found herself thinking about Ethan Vance more than she cared to admit over the following days. There had been something in his eyes, a steadiness that she had not seen in many men. Most looked at her as if she were something to be taken or used, but Ethan had looked at her as if she were a person worth knowing. He came into the store again 2 weeks later, and then again after that, establishing a pattern that brought him to town every other Tuesday like clockwork. They began to talk beyond simple transactions, small conversations about the weather, about the town, about nothing in particular. Nora found herself looking forward to those Tuesdays, found herself taking extra care with her appearance on those mornings, though she told herself it meant nothing. It was early December when everything changed. Nora was closing up the store on a Saturday evening, Mrs. Henderson having left an hour earlier to tend to her husband who had taken ill with a cold. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, and Main Street was mostly empty as men gathered in the saloons for their evening entertainment. She was just turning the key in the lock when she heard horses approaching at a hard gallop. 3 men pulled up in front of the store, their horses blowing and sweating despite the cool air. Nora felt ice slide down her spine as she recognized the type, if not the individuals. Hard men with harder eyes, the kind who made their living on the wrong side of the law and did not care who knew it. The one in the middle, a lanky man with a pockmarked face and a cruel mouth, dismounted and walked toward her with deliberate slowness. "Evening, miss. We are looking for someone." Woman about your age, dark hair, slim. Might have had a bullet wound in her shoulder. She killed a man back in Tucson, and we have been hired to bring her in. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression neutral. "Sorry, cannot help you. Plenty of women around here, but I do not know anyone matching that description." The man stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath and the sweat staining his shirt. "Thing is, miss, you match that description pretty well yourself. Why do not you come with us nice and quiet, and we can sort this all out? I think the lady said she cannot help you." The voice came from behind them, calm and level. Nora turned to see Ethan Vance standing in the street, his hand resting casually near his gun. He must have been leaving the feed store across the way, but now he stood between her and the 3 men with an expression that gave nothing away. The pockmarked man turned, sizing Ethan up. "This is not your business, friend. We are working for the law here, bringing in a fugitive." "That's so." "Let me see your warrant then." The man's jaw tightened. "Do not need to show you anything. Now step aside before you get hurt." Ethan did not move. "The way I see it, you 3 rode into town hard and fast, which means you have been tracking someone. You are accusing a respectable woman of murder without any proof, and you have not shown me any legal documentation that says you have the right to take her anywhere. So, until you do, I suggest you mount up and move along." The other 2 men had dismounted now, spreading out to flank their leader. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, and Nora knew with terrible certainty that this was about to turn violent. She opened her mouth to say something, anything that might diffuse the situation, but before she could speak, the pockmarked man went for his gun. Ethan was faster. His draw was so smooth it seemed effortless, and his shot caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the dirt. The other two froze, their hands hovering over their own weapons, clearly reconsidering their odds. "Next one goes in something you cannot live without," Ethan said quietly. "So you best think real careful about your next move." Sheriff Blackwell came running from the direction of his office, his gun drawn and his face flushed. "What in the hell is going on here?" Ethan did not take his eyes off the two standing men. These gentlemen were about to haul Miss Aldridge off without a warrant or any legal authority. When I asked to see their paperwork, they decided to make it a shooting matter. The sheriff looked at the man on the ground who was clutching his bleeding shoulder and cursing steadily. "That true, she is a wanted woman," one of the others said sullenly. "Killed a man in Tucson. We were hired to bring her in." "By who? And where is your warrant?" The men exchanged glances, and their silence was answer enough. These were bounty hunters operating on rumor and speculation, probably hoping to collect a reward that might not even exist. Sheriff Blackwell's expression hardened. "Get your friend patched up and get out of my town. If I see any of you around here again, I will arrest you for disturbing the peace. Is that clear?" The two unwounded men helped their companion onto his horse, shooting dark looks at Ethan and Nora before riding out of town at a considerably slower pace than they had arrived. The sheriff holstered his gun and turned to face them both. "Miss Aldridge, is there anything you want to tell me?" Nora met his gaze, her mind racing. She could lie, but the lie might not hold if these men came back with reinforcements. She could run, but she was tired of running. Or she could trust that Globe might be the place where her past did not have to define her future. Before she could speak, Ethan said, "Sheriff, have you had any trouble from Miss Aldridge since she came to town?" "No, she has been a model citizen." "Then I do not see that it matters what happened before she got here. If there is a legitimate warrant for her arrest, then the law will come for her properly. Until then, she is under my protection." Nora stared at him, shocked by the declaration. They barely knew each other, and yet he was willing to put himself between her and anyone who might come looking. The sheriff looked between them, his expression thoughtful. "Your protection, Ethan, you sure you want to take that on?" "Yes, sir, I am sure," the sheriff sighed. "All right then. Miss Aldridge, if anyone else comes looking for you, you come straight to me. And Ethan, try not to shoot anyone else in my town if you can help it." After the sheriff left, Nora turned to Ethan, her emotions a confused tangle of gratitude, fear, and something else she did not want to name. "Why did you do that? You do not know anything about me or what I might have done." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. "I know enough. I know you work hard, you are honest in your dealings, and Mrs. Henderson trusts you. I know you have been running scared since you got here, looking over your shoulder like you expect the devil himself to come riding in. And I know that whatever happened to you before, it has nothing to do with the woman you are now." "You do not know what happened," she whispered. "You do not know what they accused me of. Then tell me." She looked around at the empty street, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. "Not here," he nodded. "Come on, I will walk you back to your room." They walked in silence until they reached the external stairs that led to her small apartment above the store. At the bottom step, Nora turned to face him, knowing she owed him at least part of the truth. "I did not kill anyone," she said quietly, "but I was there when it happened. There was a man in Tucson, a gambler named Jack Reeves. He had a temper and a taste for whiskey, and when he lost at cards, he liked to take it out on women. I was working at a saloon, serving drinks and trying to save enough money to get out of there. He took a liking to me, and when I refused his advances, he got angry. She paused, the memories sharp and painful. One night he cornered me in the back room. He had his hands on me, was tearing at my dress, and I was fighting him as hard as I could. Then the owner of the saloon came in, pulled him off me, and told him to leave. Jack went for his gun. The owner was faster, shot him dead right there. But Jack's friends, they did not see it that way. They said I led him on, that I caused the whole thing, and when the owner left town the next day, they came after me. "That is when you got shot," Ethan said, his voice tight with anger. She nodded, touching her shoulder reflexively. "Barely got away. I have been moving ever since, trying to stay ahead of anyone who might be looking. But I am tired, Ethan. I am so tired of running." He reached out and gently took her hand, his touch warm and solid. "Then stop running. Stay here. Let Globe be the place where you make a stand. Those men will come back, or others like them. I cannot put this town in danger, cannot put you in danger." "Let me worry about that," he said firmly. "You did nothing wrong, Nora. You were defending yourself against a man who was attacking you. There is no shame in that, and there is no reason you should spend your life running because of it." Tears pricked at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She had not cried in months, had trained herself not to show weakness, but Ethan's kindness was threatening to undo all her carefully constructed walls. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again. "What am I to you?" He was quiet for a moment, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I do not rightly know yet, but I would like the chance to find out if you will let me." She looked up at him, at his serious face and steady eyes, and felt something shift inside her. For the first time since Tucson, she allowed herself to imagine a future that might include more than just survival. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "I would like that too," she said softly. He smiled, and she realized she was starting to love that smile, the way it softened his features and made him look younger. "Good. Now get some rest. I will be staying in town tonight, just to make sure those men do not come back. Tomorrow, if you are willing, I would like to take you out to my ranch. Show you that there are places in this world where you can be safe." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and watched as he tipped his hat and walked away into the gathering darkness. That night, she lay in her narrow bed and listened to the sounds of the town settling in for the night. And for the first time in months, she felt something like hope stirring in her chest. Ethan was as good as his word. He spent the night in the boarding house and was waiting outside the store when she came down the next morning. Mrs. Henderson took one look at the two of them and shooed Nora away with instructions to take the day off and not come back until she had some color in her cheeks. The ride out to the Vance ranch took the better part of an hour, following a winding road that climbed into the hills north of Globe. The landscape was rugged and beautiful, all red rock and scrubby vegetation, with mountains rising in the distance like ancient sentinels. Ethan rode easily beside her on the horse Mrs. Henderson had lent her, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the area. The ranch itself was modest but well kept. A sturdy house built of adobe and wood with a barn, a corral, and several outbuildings scattered across the property. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she could see horses in the pasture near the barn. It was the kind of place that spoke of hard work and careful planning, built by someone who intended to stay. "It is not much," Ethan said as they dismounted, "but it is home." "It is beautiful," Nora said honestly. "You have done well here." He showed her around the property, introducing her to his two ranch hands, a pair of brothers named Tom and Jim who worked the cattle and helped maintain the place. They tipped their hats politely and went back to their work without asking questions, which Nora appreciated. The house was comfortable inside, furnished simply but with care. She could see a woman's touch in some of the details, curtains and a quilt that spoke of his mother's presence even though she had been gone for years. They sat on the porch as the sun climbed higher, drinking coffee and talking about everything and nothing. Ethan told her about growing up on the ranch, about learning to work cattle from his father and how to handle the ledgers from his mother. She told him about her childhood in Kansas, about parents who had died of scarlet fever when she was 16, leaving her to make her own way in the world. "I tried to do things properly," she said, staring out at the mountains. "I worked as a seamstress, as a laundress, as anything I could find that was respectable. But the pay was never enough to live on, and the men who hired me always seemed to think that I owed them more than just honest work. Eventually, I ended up in Tucson, and you know the rest. You did what you had to do to survive," Ethan said. "There is no shame in that. Society does not see it that way. Society is full of hypocrites who would rather judge than help. You know what I see when I look at you, Nora. I see a woman who has been knocked down again and again, and who keeps getting back up. I see someone who is strong and brave and deserving of better than what life has given her. That is what matters to me." She turned to look at him, her heart aching with emotions she was afraid to name. "I do not know how to do this, Ethan. I do not know how to let someone in, how to trust that they will not hurt me or use me or leave when things get difficult." He reached over and took her hand again, and she was struck by how natural it felt, how right. "Then we will figure it out together. I am not asking for anything more than the chance to know you, Nora, to spend time with you and see where this goes. No promises, no demands. Just two people trying to build something good in a hard world." She squeezed his hand, feeling tears threaten again. "I would like that very much." They spent the rest of the day at the ranch, and Ethan taught her to ride properly, laughing when she nearly fell off during a turn and catching her before she hit the ground. They walked along the creek that ran through his property, and he showed her where he planned to build a bigger barn next spring. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they sat on a boulder and watched the cattle settle in for the night. "This is peaceful," Nora said softly. "I had forgotten what that felt like." "You could have it every day if you wanted," Ethan said, his voice carefully neutral. "I am not trying to rush you, but I want you to know that there is a place for you here. Whether that is as my wife someday, or just as someone who needs a safe place to land. Either way, you are welcome." She looked at him, at this man who had defended her without hesitation, who offered her safety and kindness without asking for anything in return. It would be easy to love him, she realized. In some ways she already did, but love was a risk, and she had been burned so many times that the thought of opening her heart was terrifying. "I need time," she said finally. "Not because I do not care for you, but because I need to know that I am choosing this for the right reasons. That I am not just running toward safety, but towards something real." "Take all the time you need," he said, and the understanding in his eyes made her fall a little bit more in love with him despite her fears. Winter settled over Globe with cold nights and bright, clear days. Nora continued to work at the store, but she also spent increasing amounts of time at the Vance ranch. Ethan would ride into town every few days, sometimes to buy supplies but more often just to see her. They would walk through town together or ride out to the ranch, and slowly, carefully, Nora began to let down her guard. She learned that Ethan had a dry sense of humor that could make her laugh until her sides hurt. She discovered that he loved reading and had a small collection of books that he shared with her eagerly. She saw how he treated his ranch hands with respect, how he was honest in his business dealings, and how the people of Globe trusted and liked him. And slowly, She began to trust that this was real, that he was not going to suddenly change into someone cruel or demanding. It was early January when the second group of men came looking for her. This time they were smarter about it. Instead of riding into town and making a scene, they asked questions quietly. They went to the saloon, to the boarding house, to the livery stable, asking about a woman who fit Nora's description. They did not mention murder or warrants, just said they were looking for a relative who had gone missing. The bartender at the saloon mentioned it to Sheriff Blackwell, who immediately went to find Ethan. Ethan was at the feed store, and the sheriff pulled him aside with a grim expression. "Got 3 men in town asking questions about a woman who sounds a lot like your Miss Aldridge. They are being cagey about why they want to find her, which makes me suspicious. Thought you should know." Ethan felt cold fury settle in his gut. "Where are they now?" "Last I saw, they were heading toward the general store." Ethan was moving before the sheriff finished speaking, his long strides eating up the distance to the store. He arrived to find 3 men standing outside, one of them peering through the window. They turned as he approached, and he sized them up quickly. These were not the same men from before, but they had the same hard look about them, the same air of violence barely contained. "Help you gentlemen with something?" he asked, his tone carefully polite. The tallest of the 3, a man with a salt and pepper beard and calculating eyes, smiled without warmth. "Just looking for someone. Woman by the name of Nora, or maybe she is going by something else now. Dark hair, slim, pretty, would have come to town a few months back." "What do you want with her?" "That is between us and her. Now, have you seen anyone matching that description or not?" Ethan looked the man dead in the eye, his expression flat and giving nothing away. "Never seen her." The man's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. "That is funny, because we have heard that you have been spending a lot of time with a woman who works at this very store. Woman by the name of Nora Aldridge." "I know a lot of people in Globe," Ethan said evenly. "Does not mean I know who you are looking for. And unless you have legal business here, I suggest you move along." The tension stretched between them, thick and dangerous. The other 2 men had spread out slightly, their hands hovering near their guns. Ethan remained still, his own hand resting casually near his weapon, every muscle coiled and ready. "We could make trouble for you," the bearded man said softly, "and for anyone else who gets in our way." "You could try," Ethan replied, his voice dropping to something cold and hard. "But you should know that this town looks after its own. You start trouble here, and it will not be just me you have to worry about. So I will ask you one more time politely. Do you have legitimate business in Globe, or are you just passing through?" The standoff lasted another long moment before the bearded man finally stepped back. "We are just passing through, but we will be back with proper legal authority next time. You can count on that." "You do that," Ethan said. "And when you come back, make sure you bring a genuine warrant signed by a real judge, not some bounty notice you made up yourselves. Because that is the only way anyone is taking Nora Aldridge anywhere." The men mounted their horses and rode out of town, but Ethan knew this was far from over. As soon as they were out of sight, he went into the store and found Nora in the back room, her face pale and her hands shaking. "You heard?" he asked. She nodded. "I was watching from the window. Ethan, this is going to keep happening. As long as I am here, I am putting you and everyone else in danger." "No," he said firmly, taking her by the shoulders. "You are not putting anyone in danger. These men are criminals looking to profit from a lie. We are not going to let them win. What can we do?" "They said they would come back with legal authority. Then we get ahead of them. I know a judge in Phoenix, a good man who is not corrupt. We will go to him, lay out everything that happened in Tucson, and get a legal ruling that clears your name." It might take time, and it will not be easy, but it is the only way to end this for good." Nora looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why are you doing all this for me? It would be so much easier for you to just let me go." He cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. "Because I love you, Nora. I think I have loved you since the first day you walked into this store and looked at me like I was just another customer, not someone to be feared or used. Because you are brave and strong and good, and you deserve to have a life that is not defined by running and hiding. And because I want that life to include me, if you will have me." She made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. "I love you too. I was so afraid to admit it, so afraid that if I did, something would happen to take it all away. But I love you, Ethan Vance, and I want nothing more than to build a life with you." He held her tight, pressing his face into her hair, and felt something settle deep in his chest. This was what he had been waiting for without knowing it, what had been missing from his life. Not just someone to share his home with, but someone to share his heart with. "Then we will do this right," he said firmly. "We will go to Phoenix, clear your name, and come back here to get married proper. And anyone who tries to stop us will have to go through me first." Mrs. Henderson, who had been listening from the doorway with unabashed interest, cleared her throat. "You two planning to give me any notice before you go running off to Phoenix?" Nora pulled back from Ethan, wiping her eyes and laughing shakily. "Mrs. Henderson, I am so sorry. I should have told you everything from the beginning." The older woman waved this away. "I knew you were running from something the day you walked in here. But I also knew you were a good girl who had gotten a raw deal from life. That is why I hired you. Now, if you are going to Phoenix, you better get going before those men come back with reinforcements. I can manage the store on my own for a few weeks." "Thank you," Nora said, her voice thick with emotion, "for everything." "Just make sure you come back married," Mrs. Henderson said with a smile. "I am getting too old to stand around hoping for happy endings. I want to see this one through." They left Globe the next morning, riding out before dawn with enough supplies for a week-long journey. Phoenix was nearly 90 miles away, a hard ride through rugged country, but Ethan knew the trails and they made good time. They stopped at ranches along the way, places where Ethan was known and where they could rest safely for the night. Nora had never spent so much time on horseback, and by the third day, she was sore in places she had not known existed. But she did not complain, and Ethan was impressed by her determination to keep up. They talked as they rode, sharing stories and dreams, learning the small details about each other that would make up the fabric of their shared life. "Tell me about your parents," she said one afternoon as they followed a rocky trail through a canyon. "What were they like?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "My father was tough but fair. He believed in hard work and honesty, and he taught me that a man is only as good as his word. My mother was the heart of the family, the one who kept us all grounded and reminded us that there was more to life than just work. She loved books and music, and she made sure I learned to read and write properly, not just enough to get by. They sound wonderful. They were. I miss them every day, but I try to live in a way that would make them proud. That is all we can do, really. Try to honor the people who came before us by building something good with the time we have been given." "I think you have done that," Nora said softly. "Your ranch, the life you have built, it is something to be proud of." "It will be even better with you in it," he said, glancing over at her with a smile that made her heart flutter. They reached Phoenix on a cold afternoon in mid-January, and Ethan immediately went to find Judge William Harrison, the man he had mentioned. Harrison was a respected jurist who had been appointed to the territorial bench and was known for his fairness, and his refusal to be intimidated by powerful interests. The judge received them in his office, a book-lined room that smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper. He was a man in his 60s with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened carefully as Nora told her story, asking occasional questions but mostly just letting her speak. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Miss Aldridge, what you have described is a clear case of self-defense, or more accurately, defense by a third party. The man who actually shot Jack Reeves was acting to protect you from assault. You committed no crime. But his friends claim I led Jack on, that I am responsible for what happened. His friends are not the law, and their opinions do not matter. Unfortunately, proving your innocence may be more complicated than it should be. The shooting happened in Tucson, which is in Pima County, and I do not have direct jurisdiction there. However, I can write a legal opinion stating that based on your testimony and the facts as presented, there is no evidence of wrongdoing on your part. I can also send inquiries to the authorities in Tucson to determine if there is actually a warrant for your arrest, or if these bounty hunters are operating on rumor and speculation." "How long will that take?" Ethan asked. "A few weeks at least, possibly longer. In the meantime, I suggest you stay in Phoenix, where I can offer some legal protection if those men come looking again." They took a room at a respectable boarding house and settled in to wait. The days passed slowly, filled with uncertainty and worry. Nora found work at a dress shop to keep herself busy, and Ethan took odd jobs around the city, unwilling to return to Globe until Nora's situation was resolved. It was early February when Judge Harrison summoned them back to his office with news. He held up a letter, his expression grim. "I have heard back from the sheriff in Tucson. There is no warrant for your arrest, Miss Aldridge. In fact, the sheriff remembers the incident well. He confirms that the saloon owner, a man named Patrick O'Brien, shot Jack Reeves in defense of you and in defense of himself, as Reeves drew his weapon first. O'Brien left town shortly after because he feared retaliation from Reeves' associates, and it seems they decided to blame you instead." Nora felt her knees go weak with relief, and Ethan steadied her with an arm around her waist. "So she is cleared. Officially, she was never charged with anything. The bounty hunters who have been pursuing her are operating entirely without legal authority. I have written a formal opinion stating as much, and I have sent copies to the sheriffs in Tucson and Globe. If anyone comes looking for Miss Aldridge again, they will find no support from the law." "What about those men?" Nora asked. "Will they be prosecuted for what they tried to do?" "That depends on whether they can be found, and whether anyone is willing to press charges. But I have made it clear in my communications that any further harassment of you will be treated as a criminal matter. My guess is that once they realize there is no money to be made and that they risk arrest if they continue, they will move on to easier targets." Ethan extended his hand to the judge. "Thank you, sir. We cannot express how much this means to us." Harrison shook his hand firmly. "Just doing my job, son. Now, I believe you mentioned something about getting married. I would be happy to perform the ceremony if you like. Consider it my wedding present to you both." They were married in Judge Harrison's office 3 days later, with the judge's clerk and his wife standing as witnesses. Nora wore a simple dress of blue calico that she had sewn herself, and Ethan wore his best suit, the one he had bought for his father's funeral and had not worn since. It was not the elaborate wedding either of them might have dreamed of as children, but it was perfect in its simplicity and sincerity. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife and Ethan kissed her for the first time as her husband, Nora felt the last of her fears fall away. She was no longer running, no longer defined by her past. She was Nora Vance now, and she was going home. The ride back to Globe took 6 days, and every mile brought them closer to the life they would build together. They stopped at the same ranches they had visited on the way to Phoenix, and this time Nora was introduced as Ethan's wife, not just his traveling companion. The ranchers and their families were warm in their congratulations, and Nora felt herself being welcomed into a community she had not known existed. When they finally rode back into Globe on a bright afternoon in late February, it felt like a homecoming. Mrs. Henderson cried when she saw them, and immediately closed the store to throw an impromptu celebration. Word spread quickly, and soon half the town had gathered to welcome them back and offer their congratulations. Sheriff Blackwell pulled Ethan aside at one point, his expression serious. "I got the letter from Judge Harrison. Sounds like Miss Aldridge, I mean Mrs. Vance, is clear of any wrongdoing. She is. It was all a misunderstanding fueled by men looking to make a quick dollar. I figured as much. Those 3 men came back through about a week ago, asking more questions. When I told them I had been in contact with the judge and that there was no warrant, they cleared out pretty fast. I do not think you will be seeing them again." "Good. We have had enough trouble to last us a lifetime," the sheriff smiled. "Well, congratulations to you both. You got yourself a good woman there, Ethan. Treat her right." "I intend to, Sheriff. I intend to." They spent that night at the boarding house in town, but the next morning they loaded up Nora's few possessions and rode out to the ranch. As they crested the last hill and the house came into view, Ethan reined in his horse and turned to her. "I know it is not much compared to what some men can offer, but this is home, Nora. Our home. And I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you are happy here." She looked at the sturdy house, at the land spreading out in all directions, at the mountains rising in the distance, and felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. "It is perfect, Ethan. It is everything I could have hoped for." He helped her down from her horse and swept her into his arms, carrying her over the threshold despite her laughing protests. "I know it is supposed to be for new brides on their wedding night, but I figured better late than never." "You are ridiculous," she said, but she was smiling as she said it, her arms wrapped around his neck and her heart so full she thought it might burst. He set her down gently in the middle of the living room and took both her hands in his. "I love you, Nora Vance. And I am going to spend every day proving it to you. I love you too," she whispered, "and I am not going anywhere ever again." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Nora took over managing the household and the ranch accounts, and Ethan discovered that she had a talent for organization that made everything run more smoothly. She also started a vegetable garden in the spring, determined to make the ranch more self-sufficient, and began raising chickens for eggs. The ranch hands, Tom and Jim, accepted her presence with good-natured grace, and soon she was cooking meals for all of them, turning the ranch house into a home in ways it had not been since Ethan's mother had died. She learned to ride properly, to help with the cattle when extra hands were needed, and to shoot a rifle well enough to defend the property if necessary. The people of Globe embraced her as one of their own. Mrs. Henderson remained a close friend, and Nora became involved in the church and the small school, helping to organize fundraisers and social events. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere, like she was part of a community that valued her for who she was rather than judging her for her past. Summer came and went in a blur of hard work and simple pleasures. They would sit on the porch in the evenings after supper, watching the sun set over the mountains and talking about their dreams for the future. Ethan wanted to expand the herd, maybe buy some more land to the east. Nora talked about starting a library in Globe, maybe teaching reading to the children whose parents could not afford to send them to school full-time. It was late August, almost exactly a year after Nora had first arrived in Globe, when she realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but she had been afraid to hope, afraid that saying it out loud might somehow jinx it. But when Doc Anderson confirmed it with a knowing smile, she felt joy and terror in equal measure. She told Ethan that evening as they sat on the porch, watching the stars come out one by one. "I have something to tell you, and I am not sure how you are going to react." He set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully, his expression concerned. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. At least I do not think so. Ethan, I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, his face frozen in shock. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his features, transforming him from serious rancher to joyful husband in the space of a heartbeat. He let out a whoop of laughter and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, his voice full of wonder. "Nora, that is the best news I have ever heard in my entire life." "You are happy?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not even begin to cover it. I am thrilled. I am terrified. I am more grateful than I can put into words." "When?" "Doc Anderson thinks late February or early March, right around our first anniversary." He pressed his forehead to hers, his hands cradling her face with infinite gentleness. "I love you so much. And I am going to love this baby, and any other babies we might have. We are going to build a family, Nora. A real family, the kind that is based on love and respect and all the things we never had when we were young." She kissed him, pouring all her love and hope and dreams into that single gesture, and knew that she had finally found what she had been searching for all those years she had been running. Not just safety or security, but a home, a place where she was loved and valued. A future that was hers to shape. The pregnancy was not easy. Nora suffered from terrible morning sickness in the first few months, and by the time winter set in, she was so large that she could barely move. But Ethan was attentive and patient, taking over more of the household duties without complaint and making sure she rested as much as possible. Mrs. Henderson came out to the ranch regularly to check on her, bringing supplies and gossip from town. Doc Anderson stopped by every week to make sure everything was progressing normally, and Ethan hovered like a worried mother hen, driving Nora to distraction with his concern. "I am pregnant, not dying," she told him one evening when he tried to stop her from getting up to clear the supper dishes. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time, Ethan. I promise I will not break." "I know," he said, looking sheepish. "I just want to make sure you and the baby are all right. I cannot lose you, Nora. You are everything to me." Her irritation melted away, replaced by love so fierce it made her chest ache. "You are not going to lose me. I am tougher than I look, remember. Now stop fussing and come sit with me. I want you to feel the baby kick." He pressed his hand to her swollen belly, and his eyes went wide as he felt the strong, steady movements beneath his palm. "That is incredible. That is our child in there, Nora, our son or daughter." "I know," she said softly. "Pretty amazing, is it not?" The baby came on a cold night in early March 1885, nearly 2 weeks early and in the middle of a rainstorm that turned the roads into rivers of mud. Doc Anderson barely made it to the ranch in time, and Mrs. Henderson came with him, refusing to be left out of the birth of her honorary grandchild. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Nora was certain she could not go on. But Ethan stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. And finally, as dawn was breaking over the mountains, Their son came into the world with a lusty cry that announced his arrival to anyone within earshot. "You have a boy," Doc Anderson said, placing the squalling infant in Nora's arms. "A healthy, strong boy." Nora looked down at her son, at his tiny face and perfect fingers, and felt a love so overwhelming that she could barely breathe. Ethan was crying unashamedly, his hand stroking the baby's downy head with infinite tenderness. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names endlessly over the past few months, but now that their son was here, Nora knew exactly what his name should be. "Elijah. Elijah Thomas Vance, after your father, Elijah," Ethan repeated, testing the name. "Yes, that is perfect, Mrs." Henderson and Doc Anderson left after a few hours, once they were satisfied that mother and baby were doing well. Alone in their bedroom with their newborn son, Nora and Ethan looked at each other across the miracle they had created. "I never thought I would have this," Nora said quietly. "A husband who loves me, a child, a home. There were so many times when I thought I would die alone and forgotten, that my life would amount to nothing but running and hiding. And now look at us." "You were always meant to have this," Ethan said firmly. "You were always meant to be loved and cherished. It just took me a while to find you." She smiled through her tears. "I am glad you did. I am glad those men came asking questions. Glad you looked them dead in the eye and said you had never seen me. Because that lie bought us the time we needed to find this truth." "It was not really a lie," he said with a small smile. "I had never seen the woman they were describing, that scared, hunted creature they were chasing. The woman I saw was strong and brave and determined to build a better life. That was the real you, Nora. That was who I fell in love with." Little Elijah began to fuss, and Nora shifted him to nurse, marveling at how natural it felt, how right. This was what she had been born to do, she realized. Not to serve drinks in a saloon or to run from men who wanted to hurt her, but to love and be loved, to create life and nurture it, to build something lasting in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. The months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and first smiles, of learning to be parents and marveling at every tiny milestone their son achieved. Elijah was a happy baby, quick to smile and slow to cry, and he had his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. The ranch hands doted on him, and Mrs. Henderson proclaimed him the most handsome baby in all of Arizona territory. When Elijah was 6 months old, Nora and Ethan took him to Globe for his first visit to town. People gathered around to admire him and offer their congratulations, and Nora felt a rush of pride and gratitude. This was her family, her community. These were people who had accepted her and stood by her when she needed them most. Sheriff Blackwell stopped them on the street, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw the baby. "Fine-looking boy you have got there. He will be a heartbreaker when he grows up, just like his mother." "Thank you, Sheriff," Nora said, smiling. "You know, I got a letter the other day from the sheriff in Tucson. Seems Jack Reeves' friends finally gave up looking for you. They got tangled up in some other trouble down in Mexico and are not likely to bother anyone in Arizona for a good long while. Thought you would want to know." Nora felt a weight she had not even realized she was still carrying lift from her shoulders. "That is good news. Very good news." "Certainly is. You deserve to live in peace, Mrs. Vance, you and your family." As they walked back to the wagon, Ethan slipped his arm around her waist. "How does it feel to be truly free?" "Incredible," she said honestly. "Like I can finally breathe all the way in. Like I do not have to look over my shoulder anymore, wondering if today is the day they find me." "Today is not that day," he said firmly. "And tomorrow will not be either. From now on, the only thing you need to think about is what we are going to have for supper, and whether our son is ever going to sleep through the night." She laughed, the sound bright and clear in the afternoon air. "Well, when you put it like that, our biggest problems do not seem so big after all." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered under their joint management, and Ethan was able to buy the additional land he had wanted, expanding their holdings and their herd. Nora started the library she had dreamed of, donating some of their own books and soliciting contributions from other residents, until they had a respectable collection housed in a room at the church. She also began teaching reading and arithmetic to children whose parents could not afford the school fees, holding classes twice a week in the same room as the library. It gave her a sense of purpose beyond being a wife and mother, though those roles filled her with joy. She wanted to give back to the community that had given her so much, wanted to help other people find the opportunities she had been given. When Elijah was 2 years old, Nora discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and she delivered a healthy daughter in the spring of 1887. They named her Emily Grace, and she was the image of her mother with dark eyes that saw everything and a stubborn streak that made them both laugh and tear their hair out in equal measure. Ethan proved to be a devoted father, patient and loving with both children. He would take Elijah out on horseback to check the cattle, teaching him about ranching and animals and the land. And he would spend hours with Emily, reading to her or playing simple games, never too busy to stop and give his children the attention they craved. "You are a good father," Nora told him one evening as they watched their children play in the yard. Elijah was 3 now, sturdy and confident, and Emily was toddling around after him with determined steps. "I am trying to be the father mine was to me," Ethan said. "Firm but fair, and always making sure they know they are loved. That is the best gift we can give them, I think, knowing they have a safe place to come home to no matter what. They will never have to run the way I did," Nora said softly. "They will never know what it is like to be afraid and alone and hunted. We have given them that, Ethan. A childhood full of love and security." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We have given each other that too, a life full of love and security. And I am grateful for it every single day." The years passed, bringing changes and growth. Elijah grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and everything about it. Emily was bright and curious, always asking questions and wanting to know how things worked. They were joined by another son, Edmund, in 1889, a quiet baby who rarely cried and seemed content to observe the world around him. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful in the region. Ethan's reputation for honesty and fair dealing spread, and he was elected to the territorial legislature in 1890, representing the interests of ranchers and farmers across Gila County. It meant spending some time in Prescott during legislative sessions, but Nora and the children often went with him, turning it into an adventure. Globe grew too, evolving from a rough mining town into a more settled community. The school expanded, the church got a new bell, and the town even got a telegraph office that connected them to the wider world. Nora's library became a fixture of the community, and her teaching helped dozens of children learn to read and write. Through it all, the love between Nora and Ethan deepened and strengthened. They had their disagreements, of course, as any couple does, but they had learned to talk through their problems and to never go to bed angry. They had built their marriage on a foundation of mutual respect and trust, and that foundation proved strong enough to weather any storm. It was 1895, 10 years after their wedding, when they finally learned the full truth about what had happened to Patrick O'Brien, the saloon owner who had saved Nora's life in Tucson. A letter arrived from a lawyer in San Francisco, informing them that O'Brien had passed away and had left Nora a small bequest in his will. "I do not understand," Nora said, staring at the letter. "I barely knew the man, and I never expected to hear from him again after he left Tucson." Ethan read over her shoulder. "Says here he felt responsible for what happened to you, that he always meant to come back and testify on your behalf, but was afraid of Reeves' friends. He wanted to make amends, so he left you $500 and a letter." The letter, when it arrived a week later, was brief but heartfelt. O'Brien explained that he had moved to San Francisco and opened a successful restaurant. He had followed Nora's story as best he could, and when he learned that she had found happiness in Globe, he had been relieved beyond measure. The money was his way of apologizing for running, for not standing up for her when it mattered most. "He did stand up for me when it mattered most," Nora said, wiping tears from her cheeks. "He saved my life that night, and because of him, I eventually found you and all of this. I wish I could have thanked him." "I think he knew," Ethan said gently. "I think that is why he left you the letter. He wanted you to know that your happiness mattered to him, that he was glad things worked out." They used the money to add onto the house, creating a proper library room where Nora could store her growing collection of books. It seemed a fitting tribute to the man who had given her a second chance at life. As the new century approached, Nora sometimes found herself reflecting on the unlikely path that had brought her to this place. If she had not been shot in Tucson, she might never have come to Globe. If those first bounty hunters had not come asking questions, Ethan might never have stepped forward to defend her. If she had given in to fear and kept running, she would have missed out on the greatest love of her life. It was funny how the worst moments could sometimes lead to the best outcomes. How what seemed like an ending could actually be a beginning. She thought about the woman she had been when she first arrived in Globe, scared and desperate and alone. That woman would barely recognize the person Nora had become, confident, loved, part of a family and a community. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching yet another sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Their children were grown now, or nearly so. Elijah was 15 and already talking about taking over the ranch someday. Emily was 12 and wanted to be a teacher like her mother. Edmund was 10 and had his nose constantly buried in books, dreaming of becoming a lawyer. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Nora said simply. "How you changed my life when you looked those men dead in the eye and said you had never seen me." Ethan smiled, the same smile that had made her fall in love with him all those years ago. "I did not change your life, Nora. I just gave you the chance to change it yourself. Everything else, everything we built together, that was all you. Your courage, your strength, your willingness to trust again even after everything you had been through. I am the lucky one that you chose to share your life with me." She took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "I would choose you again, every single time, in this life and any other." "And I would choose you," he said, raising her hand to his lips and pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "My brave, beautiful Nora, my wife, my love." They sat together as darkness fell, comfortable in the silence that comes from knowing someone so well that words are not always necessary. The sounds of the ranch settling in for the night drifted to them on the cool evening air. Cattle lowing in the distance, horses moving in the corral, a coyote's lonely howl echoing across the hills. This was home, Nora thought. Not just the house or the land, but this feeling of belonging, of being exactly where she was meant to be. It had taken her a long time to find it, and the journey had been hard and painful. But every mile, every hardship, Every moment of fear and uncertainty had been worth it to end up here, with this man, with this life they had built together. The years continued to unfold with the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. Elijah married a girl from town in 1902 and brought her to live at the ranch, where she and Nora became fast friends. Emily went off to normal school in Temp to become a certified teacher, returning each summer to help with her mother's reading classes. Edmund got his wish and studied law, eventually opening a practice in Globe, where he fought for the rights of small ranchers and miners against the big corporations that were beginning to dominate the territory. Nora and Ethan became grandparents in 1903, when Elijah and his wife Rebecca had a son they named Ethan Thomas, after his grandfather and great-grandfather. The baby was healthy and strong, with his grandmother's dark hair and his grandfather's gray eyes, and Ethan cried when he held his namesake for the first time. "This is what it all means," he said to Nora as they looked down at their sleeping grandson. "All the hard work, all the struggles, all the choices we made, it was so that we could give them this, a legacy, a foundation to build their own lives on. We did good," Nora said softly, "with our lives, with our children. We did good, Ethan." "We did better than good," he corrected. "We did extraordinary. Against all odds, against everything that tried to tear us apart, we built something beautiful and lasting, and it is going to keep going long after we are gone." More grandchildren followed. 2 more boys for Elijah and Rebecca, a daughter for Emily when she married a fellow teacher, twin girls for Edmund and his wife. The ranch house that had once seemed so empty rang with the laughter of children again, and Nora's heart was full to bursting with joy. She and Ethan aged together gracefully, their hair graying and their faces lining with the years, but their love for each other only deepening with time. They were partners in every sense of the word, sharing the work and the decisions, the triumphs and the setbacks. When Arizona became a state in 1912, they celebrated by taking a photograph of their entire family. 3 generations gathered on the porch of the ranch house. "Look at what we made," Nora whispered to Ethan as they posed for the camera. "Look at all these beautiful people who exist because you decided to protect a scared young woman all those years ago." "Because we decided to protect each other," he corrected gently. "That is what love is, Nora. Choosing each other again and again, no matter what life throws at you." The photographer told them to smile, and the flash powder exploded with a bright pop, capturing that moment forever. When Nora saw the finished photograph weeks later, she was struck by how happy everyone looked, how safe and secure and loved. This was her family, she thought with fierce pride. This was what she and Ethan had built together from nothing but love and faith and stubborn determination. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary in 1915 with a party that brought people from all over the county. The ranch house was filled with friends and family, with music and laughter and dancing. Nora wore a new dress of deep blue silk, and Ethan wore his best suit, and they danced together under the stars just as they had done at church socials 3 decades earlier. 30 years, Nora marveled as they swayed to the music. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have been together forever. Both are true, Ethan said. Every day with you is new and exciting, but at the same time, I cannot remember a time when you were not part of my life. You are woven into everything I am, Nora. You always will be. She rested her head against his shoulder, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I love you, Ethan Vance. More than I could ever put into words. I love you too, Nora Vance, to the end of my days and beyond. They continued to run the ranch together well into their 60s, though they gradually turned over more responsibilities to Elijah and his family. Nora's library had grown into a proper public library, funded by the county and housed in its own building on Main Street. She volunteered there several days a week, helping people find books and teaching children to read, just as she had been doing for nearly 4 decades. Ethan served on the school board and the town council, using his influence to improve Globe and the surrounding area. He fought for better roads, for a proper hospital, for schools in the rural areas where children had no other way to get an education. People respected him, trusted him, and when he spoke, they listened. But more than any of their individual accomplishments, Nora and Ethan were known throughout the region as a couple who truly loved each other, who had built a marriage that stood as an example of what two people could create when they committed themselves fully to each other and to a shared vision. Young couples would come to them for advice, and they always gave the same counsel: communication, respect, partnership, and the willingness to choose love even when it would be easier to walk away. The secret, Ethan would say with a smile, is marrying your best friend. Someone you genuinely enjoy spending time with, not just someone who looks good or who meets some checklist of requirements. If you marry your best friend, then every day is an adventure, even the hard days. And always remember why you fell in love in the first place, Nora would add. When things get difficult, and they will, go back to that moment when you knew this was the person you wanted to spend your life with. Hold on to that, and everything else will work itself out. It was a crisp autumn morning in 1923 when Ethan had a heart attack while working with Elijah to repair a fence. He collapsed without warning, and by the time they got him back to the house and sent for the doctor, it was clear that his time was short. He was 70 years old, and his heart had simply worn out after a lifetime of hard work and dedication. Nora sat by his bedside, holding his hand and willing him to stay with her, even though she knew it was selfish. Their children and grandchildren gathered around, saying their goodbyes, but Ethan's eyes were only for Nora. "I am sorry," he whispered, his voice weak but still full of love. "I wanted more time with you. I wanted to see our great-grandchildren grow up, wanted to watch the ranch continue for another generation." "You will," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You will see it all from wherever you are going, and you will wait for me there just like you have been waiting for me your whole life." He smiled, the same beautiful smile that had captured her heart nearly 40 years earlier. "Always, I will always wait for you, Nora. You are my heart, my soul, my everything, and this is not goodbye, it is just until we meet again." "I love you," she said, her voice breaking on the words. "I love you so much, Ethan Vance. Thank you for giving me a life worth living. Thank you for choosing me when you could have chosen anyone." "Easiest choice I ever made," he said softly. Then his eyes drifted closed and his breathing became shallow. A few moments later, with his family surrounding him and his beloved wife holding his hand, Ethan Vance passed peacefully into whatever comes next. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that made it hard for Nora to breathe. But she did not fall apart, not with her children and grandchildren depending on her to be strong. She organized the funeral, accepted condolences from what seemed like half of Arizona, and stood dry-eyed beside the grave as they lowered her husband into the earth. It was only later, alone in their bedroom, that she finally allowed herself to break. She held Ethan's pillow to her chest and sobbed until she had no tears left, mourning not just the man but the life they had shared, the future they would not have together. For the first time in decades, she felt truly alone. But as the days passed, she began to realize that she was not alone, not really. Ethan was in every room of the house, in every fence post and water trough, in the eyes of their children and grandchildren. He was in the library she had built, in the students she had taught, in the community they had helped create. He was everywhere, woven into the fabric of her life so completely that she could never truly lose him. Nora lived for another 12 years, staying active and engaged with her family and her community. She saw great-grandchildren born, saw Emily become the principal of Globe's elementary school, saw Edmund successfully argue a case before the state Supreme Court. She continued to volunteer at the library until her health began to fail, and she remained a fixture at family gatherings, the beloved matriarch who held them all together. She died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1935, at the age of 74, with a smile on her face and Ethan's photograph clutched in her hand. Her children found her like that in the morning, and they all agreed that she looked at peace, as if she had finally found what she had been waiting for. They buried her next to Ethan, under a large oak tree that shaded both their graves. The tombstones were simple but elegant, recording their names and dates and the words together always. And on Nora's stone, their children had added one more line: she was loved and she was free. The ranch continued for generations after them, passed down through the Vance family, and kept as a working cattle operation. The house was expanded and modernized, but the original structure remained, and family members still gathered there for holidays and celebrations. They told stories about Ethan and Nora, keeping their memory alive, making sure that future generations knew about the love story that had started it all. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting over the mountains, people swore they could see two figures standing on the porch of the old house, hand in hand, watching the cattle settle in for the night. Just shadows, probably, or tricks of the light. But the family liked to think it was Ethan and Nora, still together, still watching over the land and the people they had loved so well. Because that was the kind of love they had shared, the kind that transcended death and time and everything else that tried to separate them. It was the kind of love that started with a lie told to protect someone who needed protecting, and that grew into a truth so powerful and beautiful that it echoed down through the decades. In the end, Nora Aldridge Vance had found everything she had been searching for in those desperate years of running and hiding. She had found a home, a family, a purpose, and most importantly, a love that saw her not as a woman with a shameful past, but as someone worthy of protection, respect, and devotion. She had found a man who looked her would-be captors dead in the eye and said he had never seen her, then spent the rest of his life making sure she was always seen, always valued, always cherished. And that, more than anything else they accomplished in their long and fruitful lives, was the real legacy of Ethan and Nora Vance. The proof that love, when given freely and accepted courageously, can transform not just two lives but generations to come. That sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single act of bravery, whether that is standing up to armed men in the street or opening your heart to someone, despite all the reasons you have to keep it closed. Their story became part of the folklore of Globe, Arizona, told and retold around dinner tables and at community gatherings. The details might have changed over the years, embellished and romanticized by time, but the core truth remained the same. Two people who found each other against all odds, who built something beautiful in a hard land, and who loved each other with a devotion that became legendary. The library Nora founded still stands on Main Street, expanded many times but still serving the community just as she had envisioned. Inside, there is a plaque dedicated to her memory, with her photograph and a quote she used to tell her reading students. "Books can take you anywhere, but love is what brings you home." The school where Emily taught was eventually named after her, and Edmund's law firm continued for 3 generations, always maintaining his commitment to fighting for the underdog. The ranch that Ethan built with his father continued to thrive, weathering droughts and recessions, adapting to changing times while maintaining its core values of hard work, integrity, and stewardship of the land. The Vance name became synonymous with quality cattle and honest dealing, and when people asked the secret to the ranch's longevity, the answer was always the same. It was built on a foundation of love and partnership, and that foundation proved strong enough to last through anything. In the end, the story of Ethan and Nora Vance was not about running from the past or hiding from enemies. It was about finding the courage to stand still, to plant roots, to build something lasting in a world that often seemed determined to tear everything down. It was about looking at someone and seeing not what they had been, but what they could become. It was about saying, "I choose you," and meaning it with every fiber of your being every day for the rest of your life. It was a love story, pure and simple. The kind that people tell their children and grandchildren, hoping they will be lucky enough to find something even half as beautiful. The kind that reminds us that no matter how dark things seem, no matter how far we have fallen or how lost we feel, there is always the possibility of redemption, of starting over, of finding someone who sees us for who we really are and loves us anyway. And it all started with a simple act of protection, with a cowboy looking a group of dangerous men dead in the eye and saying, "Never seen her." Those 3 words changed everything, set in motion a chain of events that would echo through time and touch countless lives. They were 3 words spoken in defense of a stranger, but they became the foundation of a love that would last beyond death, beyond memory, into legend. That was the true power of what Ethan and Nora built together. Not just a life or a family or a legacy, but proof that sometimes the most extraordinary things come from the most ordinary moments. That courage does not always look like facing down armed men in the street. Sometimes it looks like opening your heart to someone new. That love is not just a feeling but a choice, one that has to be made over and over again, through good times and bad, through triumph and tragedy. And in the end, that choice, that decision to love and be loved, to protect and be protected, to stand together against whatever the world might throw at you, that was what mattered most. That was what made the difference between simply existing and truly living. That was what transformed 2 broken, hurting people into a force of nature, into an example that would inspire others for generations to come. The sun set over the Arizona mountains, just as it had done for centuries before Ethan and Nora were born, and would continue to do for centuries after their deaths. But for the time they were alive, for those precious decades they had together, they made the world a little bit brighter, a little bit kinder, a little bit more full of love. And in doing so, they proved that redemption is always possible, that second chances are real, and that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with a lie told to protect the truth of what 2 hearts already know. That they belong together, now and forever in this life, and whatever comes after.